Welcome to episode 281 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer, director Tony Germinario. I had him on over a year ago to talk about his film Bad Frank. That was episode number 184. I will link to that in the show notes, so if you haven't already listened to that, do check that out. Well, he is back this week with a new film, The Prince of Silence. We talk through that film and exactly how he got it produced, so stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 281. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer-director Tony Germinario. Here is the interview. Welcome back, Tony, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure.
So I just want to refer everybody, you were on the podcast before, and it's episode number 184. I will link to that in the show notes so you can kind of get some of your background. We're not going to repeat all of that information here. We're just going to dive into your latest film. So let's start to talk about that. Maybe you can tell us what The Price for Silence is all about. Maybe a quick logline or pitch.
Sure. It's basically about a girl who was assaulted when she was a teenager, and her father actually took money in order to stay quiet. It's now years later. Her father has passed away, and she comes home to confront everybody, from the person that did it, people that covered it up, and her own family.
Mm-hmm. So where did this idea come from? What was the genesis for this story?
You know what? After working with Lynn Mancinelli in Bad Frank, I just went to her with the idea. I woke up one night, and in the middle of the night I actually woke up and I had this idea, and this was actually well before the Me Too movement ever started. We actually wrote and shot the film before, we finished it about a couple of weeks before the whole Me Too thing started. So just happened to be very timely that the film that we made ties into everything that's going on today. So I came with the idea. I went to Lynn and I said, hey, I've got this idea. Are you interested? And she jumped right in with both feet. She's super brave and courageous, and we kind of fashioned the story together. So I wrote it, but it was definitely with a lot of her input and her insight. So it was extremely collaborative.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about your writing process on this film a little bit. Just a couple quick questions to start.
Sure.
Typically, where do you write? Do you write here in your office? Do you go to Starbucks? I'm always curious just to kind of hear about that.
I write in the bowels of my basement in my house. So yeah, it's typically here. If I'm traveling, I might do some work on a plane, because that's actually a pretty self-contained area that I'm stuck, especially if I'm flying from coast to coast. It's 6 hours of dedicated time that, I can actually do that. So, but primarily I'd say it's, right down here in my basement.
Okay, perfect. And when do you typically write? When are you down in the basement the most? Is it in the middle of the night? Is it morning? Is it afternoons? When is your most productive times?
Late at night. My wife and kids are usually all in bed by 10 o'clock, and I'm a night owl by trade, so that's about when I start hitting my sweet spot, is around 10:30 or 11. Mm-hmm. I'll usually go for an hour to 2 hours at a time, and sometimes during the day, if I get an idea, I'll jot stuff down. But my real writing takes place later at night. Okay. I do some pretty dark and demented stuff, so I think that's definitely what is most conducive.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk about the collaboration with this actress. Maybe just talk us through exactly how that process worked. It sounds like you went to her with the idea. Do you guys then, was it phone calls? Was it Skype calls? Did you meet for coffee and just work over the ideas? Did you guys have a notebook? Maybe talk through that. I know a lot of people have collaborators in one form or another, and I'm always curious just to kind of hear how you work that relationship.
Sure. Well, she's local, so we were able to get together. So basically, what I do is I'd write for a week, 2 weeks, or whatever it might be. We'd get together, and I will have sent her a copy of the script, and she'll come back with my ideas. Like, yes, this works here, and I don't think I would do this in this situation, or we might want to think about this. So we had several meetings where we got together and did that sort of thing. Now, in addition to Lynn, George Storr, who's one of my producers, was also very instrumental in the process as well. Because he's one of the producers. He does a lot of the business side, but he's very unheralded in regards to his creative side as well. So he always had some good ideas for me in addition to Lynn. So I'd say between all of us, that really was how the creative process worked well together.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like then you're showing her script pages, she's reading them, critiquing them. Was there an outlining stage that you were just going through, just kind of spitballing ideas? And how much time do you spend on that? That's sort of one of my classic questions. How much time do you spend outlining? And then how involved was Lynn in that? And then how much time do you spend actually in final draft cranking out pages?
I didn't really outline it per se because it was all in my head. And I just talked through it with her. Like, we went through idea after idea, just, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And the script moved pretty quickly. I mean, I think the first draft, considering it's not my full-time gig, first draft we got done in just a couple of months. But we were also honing it along the way, right? I think one of my big things that I'm working on is, once I get the idea, I start writing the script, I just have to finish it. I tend to go back and, I'll write 20 pages and I'll go back and I'll tweak 2 or 3 pages and then I'll write another 10 pages. But while I'm doing that, I'm going back and tweaking more stuff. And I want to get to the point where I crank through it and get a draft done and then go back and look at everything. Otherwise, it seems to take a lot longer than maybe it should. Yeah. But, that's all part of the process. I'm quirky just like everybody else. So it's just what I do.
Sure. Now, it seems to me that Bad Frank kind of had this same sort of revenge thriller aspect to it. These sort of, they're not exactly mob movies, but there's definitely sort of that undercurrent of illegal, activity or whatever.
Sure.
How do you come at that? I mean, just being from New Jersey, you've been around these people, but how do you come at that? Was there something from a distributor that said, hey, these kinds of movies sell? Maybe just talk about that sort of in general, why you're choosing these types of stories.
Yeah, you know what? I it's a great question, and I think the reason why is because it's so far apart from my regular character. Right. Anyone who meets me, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with some folks around this because they saw Bad Frank and I told them about The Price for Silence. They looked at me and said, dude, what's wrong with you? Because my stories are somewhat demented. And I think that's kind of where it comes from is, everyone has that part of them and maybe this is my way of purging it. Because, I am such a down-to-earth, low-key kind of guy that this story surprises people when I mention it to people, and because it's disturbing and it's dark. And I'm actually 3 of my other projects that are coming out right now, 2 of them are horror projects that I'm working on right now, and the ideas just show up. And it's kind of like a scratch. Once you get that idea, you got to itch it. So, it's like an itch you got to scratch. So once I have it, it's like I gotta finish it and get it out there. So, but that's kind of what it was.
Okay, and I'm going to ask this question in a variety of forms. Once we get into production and financing and that kind of stuff, I will ask it again. But just in terms of the screenplay, what lessons did you learn from Bad Frank that you were able to actually apply to this new project?
I think just keeping it as tight as possible and also writing for locations that you have. We were able to do that with Bad Frank, and I absolutely learned, hey, don't go for the big budget scenes or the big budget locations. Put your characters in places that are meaningful, but that you can get within the budget you have access to. Right, that's very important because you don't want to sacrifice anything, but you also want to make sure you're hitting the points that you want. Mm-hmm. So to me, that was a big lesson that I learned, and also keep your character count as low as you can. Right, we condensed a couple of characters into one character because less people on set, less budget spent on actors, less budget spent on craft services. So when you are basically making a low budget independent film, you got to do everything you can to keep the budget down. So those are some things that I always try and keep in mind and make sure that we follow.
I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on the locations thing you just mentioned. Were these just locations like your college buddy owns a restaurant down here, so you knew you could shoot there, or do you kind of just go out and talk to some people and say, hey, could we shoot here potentially? Maybe we'll just work through like what are those locations and what is your relationship with them?
Yeah, so like we shot at a funeral home. I know the guy that owns the funeral home in our town. I know the guy or a guy that's very highly involved in the fire department, so we were able to use the firehouse, and they had a great back room that we were held a party in. I knew some folks that had access to a great bar, so we had this awesome bar that we used, and we shot overnight, and he let me do it for free. So, all those guys, they gave us their time and their locations for nothing just because they were good friends. And that allowed us to put a little bit of budget into some of the other locations that we didn't necessarily have. We shot overnight at a parking garage that, they basically just charged us to park our cars there and didn't charge us anything else. So the whole location only cost us $10 because it was overnight and they stopped charging at a certain point. So yeah, so that's always helpful is if I know I have access to something, how can I potentially incorporate that into a scene that's going to make sense? You can't force it, but, usually you can find a way to make it into a story that's going to, really relate.
All right, so let's move into the next phase of this. You have a screenplay. It sounds like you worked with your lead actress. You've polished it up. What are then the next steps to raising the money, getting this thing financed, getting this thing into production?
Well, Bad Frank helped us a lot. It did quite well, and the film was one that really resonated with people. They liked it. So we were able to get a couple of investors to come on board and put the money up for us, which was, for me, was unbelievable because it's the first time, we didn't have to use our own money in order to do that. So we got a couple of producers to come on board and really, put up the funding for it. And, we were smart in the way that we did it. We put the money into the film. We did set aside some marketing budget. We set aside some travel budget for festivals so we could really go and promote the film. And, so far it's worked out great. I actually just got back from Beaufort, South Carolina, and the Beaufort International Film Festival where we were one of the finalists. And we've got a whole bunch more festivals coming up, and but it's really helped part of the process.
Okay, perfect. And how did you get introduced to these producers that were able to bring financing? Maybe you can talk specifically about, did they just see your film at a film festival and approach you? Maybe just talk through that process a little bit.
Yeah, so it was, one of them was a guy I used to work with, so it was a personal connection, and another guy was George Storr, who I mentioned earlier. It was a connection of his, and then the two other folks were, people who knew someone that I knew. So it was very, I guess, grassroots, where we were able to get connected to some people. The festival circuit's been great. I would love to find people out there on the festival circuit that might want to be part of the next project, but that was not something that we did for this specific one. But yeah, I think it really comes down to if you get to meet them and they see how genuine and excited you are about your project and how much you believe in it, and if they believe in you and the way you think about it, then, they're more apt to really want to become part of that project.
Perfect. I'm curious about what distributors said to you about Bad Frank in terms of, like I just said, what were the lessons you learned? Were there some things that you saw with Bad Frank that, like you just said, Bad Frank was a success? Was there some things that you saw that maybe you said, aha, I got to do that in my next film? That seemed to be something that distributors really glommed onto. And maybe you can talk about those a little bit. Maybe something they said, just anything that insight you got from a distributor.
Well, early on, the first distributors I talked to, they asked two questions: who's in it, and is there any nudity? So we didn't really focus on that. But, and in this particular film, in The Price for Silence, we had Richard Thomas in it. So Richard Thomas is, an industry vet. He's a fantastic actor. He had a wonderful performance in the film. And, he's someone that when you put him on the poster and you let people see, what he does, and that kind of opens people's eyes as a distributor. So that's certainly one of the things that if you can find someone, it doesn't have to be, the lead role. It's someone that at least has somewhat of a significant part that you can sell the film using them, right? You might only get them for 2 days or 3 days of the production, but that's fine as long as it's an integral part that you can really focus on. Hey, this guy is important to our film. That's something that goes a long way.
Okay. And so let's talk specifically about that. I get emails all the time from screenwriters. How can I get this actor or that actor attached to my project? Maybe just run through the process of getting Richard Thomas attached to the project. Was it hiring a casting director? Was it just reaching out to his agent? You as the director reaching out to his agent? Maybe talk through that process a little bit.
Yeah, so for 2 films now, we've never used a casting director. For the most part, we've reached out to people who we actually knew someone who had met Richard Thomas and had worked on a project with someone who knew him. So we actually went directly to the agent. So we got introduced to the agent. We just sent him an offer. So I think what you'll find is when there are people of a certain stature, you can approach them directly, but you might have to just make them an offer, right? They, especially when you're talking about an independent project. Mm-hmm. The agent immediately is going to say, what's the offer? What's the project? So they'll want to know what the deal is a lot of times even before they'll look at the script. So that becomes real important. Just know what you're prepared to spend and what you're able to, use as part of the budget to go to a specific actor, and just go right to the agent. Call them up, send them an email. They'll always respond. If they're close to their number, they're usually amenable to work with. The number that we went to Richard Thomas with was a lot lower than what his agent was looking for initially, but we sent the script. He had some time in between projects. He had just come off The Americans, and he had also just finished a play on Broadway, so he had a couple weeks off in between. And he, believe it or not, even 60 years in the business, he'd never really done an independent film like this. So it was exciting to him. It was something of a challenge for him. And we had him on set for 5 days, and the guy he blew it out of the water. He was amazing. Mm-hmm. So, just never be afraid to just go directly to the agent and just shoot an offer, right? You have nothing to lose. The worst they can say is no. And, as screenwriters, we hear no all the time. So it's just another no. It'll get you to your next yes a lot faster.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 questions on that. Number one, if you don't have a casting director who's sort of used to making these offers, how do you find that starting number? Because you never want to offer too much, but you don't want to go too little, sure, or then you won't be taken seriously. So how did you come? You don't have to tell me what that starting offer was, but how did you kind of arrive at that? What was the logic you used for that?
Well, I really looked at what budget we had, right? So depending on what the budget is, how much are you going to lot to your actors? Right, so if you're working on a $100,000 film, right, you're going to have to worry about, how much is my camera people going to cost? How much is it going to cost for travel expenses and for, craft services and things like that? So, what is the budget that you're going to lot to the actors? Then you have to look at, how many days is the shoot? Because when you come down to most of the actors in independent films, you're going to get for scale, right? So if it's ULB, ultra low budget, then you're talking $125 a day for the actors. So depending on how much you have left, that really determines where you're going to be able to put your offers from, right? So, and don't be afraid to come in with a lower offer to someone that you think might be out of your range, because at the end of the day, you can always improve the offer. But a lot of actors just want to work, right? If they feel that there's a good project out there and they want to, keep that acting muscle going, sometimes they'll do projects for way less than you would think.
Yeah. So did you talk to distributors? One of the things that I've found is that the value an actor has is not always intuitive. Like some people that are big stars in the U.S. may not be big stars outside of the U.S., and we don't always necessarily know that. Did you talk to a distributor? Like Richard Thomas is someone I love. Like I grew up in the 80s, so it's like I saw Sure. Battle Beyond the Stars. It's like when I saw this guy was in your movie, I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. But he's not someone that I would have necessarily thought of because he doesn't do a lot of these low budget movies. He's Sure. not one of those guys. So frankly, I think it's actually a really good move to get someone like him that has a lot of clout. But I'm just curious, did you talk to a distributor and say, hey, if we get this guy, what do you think this movie is worth?
We didn't for him, no. When we got the opportunity to work with him, we just jumped at it. Mm-hmm. I would say that moving forward, that's part of the formula that we're starting to use to speak to potential investors, right? So what's the international pre-sale for specific actors, right? Because there's 2 main things that we've been looking at when we're looking at future projects, right? It's tax credits and it's international pre-sales. Right, so if you're looking at $1 million budget and you're trying to get your investors out there, right? Well, if I can say to someone, if we're to shoot in Syracuse, New York, they give a 40% tax credit. So right away, you're mitigating the risk of the investment, because if you're getting anywhere from 30 to 40% back, and it's cash that comes back, it's not like a credit, it's actual cash that you'll get back. So if right away you're getting 30 to 40%, that's $300,000, $400,000 return on $1 million investment. And then if I can say, if we get this actor, we can pre-sell it internationally because of this actor for 200,000 or 250,000, right? So right there, you've made well over 50% back on the budget without even really shooting anything, right? Because you've allotted for the tax credits, you're getting the pre-sales, so you basically turn $1 million film into a $350,000 film. So if you can think of those sort of things and use that as your research, if you will, and find someone who can get you those numbers, and there are some folks out there, distributors and such, who are kind enough to do that, that it really puts you in a whole different playing field.
Yeah, for sure. So just so people that are listening to this don't get laughed out of the house, maybe you can describe what that offer actually looks like in an email. What do you actually put in there? It's a document, and you're making like an offer, so there's probably some legal ramifications with something like this. So maybe just talk through like exactly what does like a real offer to a real actor look like through their agents.
I mean, it's actually a very simple email. I mean, it's, hey, we have this project that we're working on. Here's the name of it. Here's the log line. We'd be looking at, we'd love to make an offer to Richard, for example, and, it's going to take up 5 days of his time. That's what the shoot would be. And you talk about where it's going to be located, and then you present your number. So it can be that simple, because, agents are busy. They're getting offers all the time. They don't want to read this huge email about something. Keep it short, keep it sweet and to the point. And make sure you're telling them exactly what you need them to know about the film, and that's really it.
Okay. Well, the first question that always seems to come back from the agent is the movie funded? Like they always want to know, like, how close are this? Was that something you put in your initial offer? Like, listen, we have funding in place, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I think we had that in there. Yeah, I mean, certainly if you have it, that's great. But not everybody has it, right? Sometimes that's the catch-22, right? Is people will give you the funding if you can get that actor, but that actor won't come on board unless you can get the funding. So, a lot of times that's a little game that you have to try and figure it out. And, sometimes you try and find someone who knows somebody that you can get to, and maybe they'll sign a letter of intent without actually doing the deal, right? Those are hard to come by, but, if you're connected to any actors, or if you know people that can get you in front of actors, that sometimes, like I said, if they're really like the script and really want to work, they might sign on for a letter of intent. Like I have a science fiction project that I'm working on that we've gotten 3 letters of intent from people to do this project. So we're hopeful that eventually it's a larger budget. I mean, it's actually an 8-figure budget that we're looking for. So it's harder to come by, but we've got 3 letters of intent attached to it that when we show to people, they can see, okay, these guys are serious. They've already got some names to it. This is something we can really feel good about. So, I think that's really what you want to do, is try and find it if you can, but you don't necessarily have to have it.
Yeah. I'm curious too, and you may not know the answer to this, but I'm curious how much your resume as a director, because that's the other thing I know agents will look and see, like a lot of very experienced actors, they don't necessarily want to work with a first-time director. You've got some directing credits under your belt, so I'm curious how much you think that helped all of this situation. Richard I'm sure him and his agent looked you up on IMDb, they saw that you had a bunch of credits. How much do you think that impacted this whole process?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, I'd like to think they looked me up and said, hey, this guy we want to work with, but I don't know. I mean, that never actually came up. I think he read the script, he liked it, and Richard he's a very humble guy. When he showed up on set, like I said, he's been in the business for 6 decades. I'm basically starting my 2nd film, and he'd show up, and every day is like, all right, what are we doing today, boss? Just tell me what you need. And he was fantastic. And the thing about him is he wasn't the kind of guy that just showed up and mailed it in. He was legitimately engaged in the character, and he did the research, and he was asking great questions. And while we were on set, he'd say, well, I was thinking about this line here, and I don't know if that's the right line. Can we change it? I'd go off for about 20 minutes. I'd come back with another line. Yeah, this works. This is great. So he was fully invested in the role, which you don't get all the time. So that just goes to show what a pro he was, and he worked so well with everybody else. So it couldn't have been a better experience with him. So I'd like to think that maybe he looked me up and said, "Yeah, this guy, I love Bad Frank. Let's go. Let's be part of the next project." So let's hope.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What do you have on the docket? You mentioned a science fiction project, but what else you got going?
Gosh, we've got so many things going on right now. We just finished a short film that we're just going to put out there. Just like flexing your muscles, right? You don't want to be sitting around too long in between. So I did a short film with Lynn Mancinelli again, and with Emerus Cooper, who is also in The Price for Silence. But I'm working on a horror film with Choice Skinner, who is actually he's the guy that got me started in the business. So we're still very good friends. We're working on a project together, a horror film that we're looking to shoot in the South. I'm working on a film called The Firehouse, which is another. It's an art world-based horror film. I've got a project called Daddy-O Sugar, which is about a man-child who's in search of his father. Huh. So we've got so many ones out there right now that it's a matter of just, how do we get the funding for these projects? And, now hopefully that our second film, which has been getting good reviews, we've now got a really good track record. So my hope is that people come on board and say, hey, we'd love to be part of the next one. Mm-hmm. So we're just continuing to build that groundswell. And, when you do quality work, you hope people recognize it and just want to continue to be part of it.
Yeah, for sure. So you keep saying that we have this and we have that. What does your team look like? Sounds like Lynn is a part of this proverbial we, but maybe you can talk about what does that team actually look like? Who are all the people that are in this we?
Yeah, so I mean, the full we is myself, Lynn, George Storr, who I mentioned earlier, and Jeff Burnett, who's he's actually Daddy-O Sugar. Okay. So he's more of a recent addition to the full team. But we also have all these people that we work with, right? So I've got a couple of DPs that I work with that are both fantastic, and I part of the reason I want to get these projects going is because I want to keep them busy so that they can't go to other places, right? I want to work with them all the time, and my makeup people, my sound people, these guys are all fantastic, and I want to make sure I keep them busy because the more I do, the more we can elevate everybody else, right? And to me, that's all part of it. Is we've got this great little family that we've developed, and even some of the actors that I now work with, I try and put the same people into projects all the time. Like Kevin Smith is one of my guys. He's like my favorite writer director, and he brings the same people in all the projects. So I'm just trying to keep that same mentality. I worked with Brian O'Halloran on Bad Frank, and I've already been talking to him on getting him into something else because he's a good guy, and he fits well with what we look to do. So we've got this little close-knit family that I just I feel I'm bound to do stuff with them. I feel committed that no matter what I do, I just got to keep them busy.
Yeah. How can people see The Price of Silence? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
It's going to be coming out this spring. So we're just about to sign a distribution deal with a company called Indie Rights. So we're really excited. We're going to be out on all the platforms. We're even going to get a couple of theaters for a quick theatrical run. But yeah, it should be sometime in, I think, June or early July.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for it. What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Facebook, Twitter, blog, website, anything you're comfortable sharing, I will round up for the show notes and you can mention it here.
Sure. If you look me up on Twitter or Instagram, it's just Tony Germ, TonyGerm. I've got a Facebook account, but I keep hitting that 5,000 person limit. But keep trying because people come in and out all the time.
Okay, perfect. I'll round that up for the show notes. Well, Tony, good luck with this film, and of course, good luck with your next film as well. And I look forward to talking to you about that as well.
Thanks so much. You'll be first on my list.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Tony. We'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
See ya.
I just want to talk quickly about SYS Select. It's a service for screenwriters to help them sell their screenplays and get writing assignments. The first part of the service is the SYS Select Screenplay database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre, and then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays they want to produce. Dozens of producers are in the system looking for screenplays right now. There have been a number of success stories come out of the service. You can find out about all the SYS Select successes by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Also on SYS podcast episode 222, I talked with Steve Deering, who was the first official success story to come out of the SYS Select database. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the Screenplay database along with all the other services that we're providing to SYS Select members. These services include the newsletter. This monthly newsletter goes out to a list of over 400 producers who are actively seeking writers and screenplays. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in this monthly newsletter. We also provide screenwriting leads. We have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads services, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These leads run the gamut. There's producers looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. They're looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots, all types of projects. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. Also, you get access to the SYS Select forum, where we will help you with your logline and query letter and answer any screenwriting related questions that you might have. We also have a number of screenwriting classes that are recorded and available in the SYS Select forum. These are all the classes that I've done over the years, so you'll have access to those whenever you want once you join. The classes cover every part of writing your screenplay, from concept to outlining to the first act, second act, third act, as well as other topics like writing short films and pitching your projects in person. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that is sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing writer-director Liam Omashan, who just did a film called Lost and Found, which is an art house comedy drama. He had a very interesting approach to shooting this film. The film has several interconnected stories, so he shot each individual story sort of on its own as a short, and then was able to edit them together into one cohesive story. But he shot it over many, many, many months, and this was an interesting just way of going about doing this. He had a background in doing short films, so he figured what could he do to kind of put those skills to work, and this is what he came up with. It's another great example of someone getting creative to shoot a film on the budget that they have and just going out there and making things happen for themselves. So keep an eye out for this episode next week. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.